Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much to be with us today. Just a second.
Okay. And I'm Alessia Rogai, and I'm the Knowledge Management and Learning Coordinator of the project Bridging the Gap. For those who didn't attend last session and therefore maybe know a little less about the project, Bridging the Gap is a European-funded initiative coordinated by FIA, the International Ibero-American Foundation for Administration and Public Policies, in partnership with 3 European agencies for development cooperation, the Spanish, the Italian, and the Austrian one, and 2 international NGOs, the European Disability Forum and the International Disability and Development Consortium. The initiative aims to contribute to the socio-economic inclusion, equality, and non-discrimination of persons with disabilities through more inclusive and accountable institutions and policies. In the framework of the knowledge management strategy developed within the project, we built a webinar-based training cycle to gradually explore the different cross-cutting issues taken into consideration by the project action. The first session of this training cycle was an introduction to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, its principle and structure. For those who missed it, you can find the video of the first webinar on the project website, on Facebook and Twitter pages, and on YouTube channels. You can find the links here in the chat box. Today, we are here for the second session titled The Sustainable Development Goals and Their References to the Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities. Persons with disabilities were not considered in the Millennium Development Goals and therefore left at the margins of development initiatives. By contrast, the SDGs do consider persons with disability in 7 targets which explicitly refer to their inclusion. This training session introduces the SDGs, how they connect to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, and how to develop a CRPD-compliant SDG strategy. To help us today to answer fundamental questions about the SDGs and their explicit reference to disability, such as why they are so important, who it involves, and what has to be done to respect the rights of persons with disability in line with the CRPD, we have the chance to have here with us Marion Steff, the SDGs Coordinator at the European Disability Forum. Marion works on reinforcing EDF advocacy platform to influence the European approach to the SDGs. She's engaged in building the capacity of organization of persons with disability for inclusive SDGs at national level, and she also worked on international coordination projects with EDF. Previously, Marion was a policy advisor at Site Server, and early in her career, she conducted a study for the World Bank on higher education and disability in Indonesia. She worked also in the research team of Monterey Rehabilitation Center, and also she co-managed the Center for Disability Studies and Services, always in Indonesia. What I can say, Marion, your curriculum is really impressive. I would like to go further, but I prefer to give you the floor to take as much as possible all your experiences on this important subject. Just before starting, I would like to give a couple of technical tips to the audience. The webinar is live captioned, and the link to follow the live captioning is here in the chat box, or you can find it in the reminder email you received previously. So, well, now for real, I give you the floor to Marion, and thanks a lot.
Hello. I'm just wondering if you all can hear me well. I guess you can. So my name is Marion Steff. I work for the European Disability Forum. I'm the Sustainable Development Goals Coordinator, SDG. Well, thank you, Alicia, for giving me the floor, and also thank you for the invitation from Bridging the Gap to talk about the SDGs. Before going further, I would like just to talk quickly about EDF. EDF is stands for the European Disability Forum, and it's an organization of persons with disabilities. So it's a DPO. We represent the interest of 80 million of Europeans with disabilities. So it's really very much a unique platform which brings together a representative organization of persons with disability from across Europe. EDF is run by a person with disability and their families. So today I'll be asked to talk about the SDGs. And I think for me it's very important that before going further, I also talk about the 2030 agenda. So I just changed slide. And on the slide I have in front of me, that you have in front of you, I've actually put the publication of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And it's also, I changed slide, it's also called the 2030 Agenda. The SDGs are actually part of the 2030 Agenda. So pretty much what is important to know is that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is a universal commitment. It's been adopted by 193 world leaders of this world, of this planet, to end poverty, to reduce inequality, and save the earth. So as you can see, it's a very, very important vision of how the world should be, how the world should be by 2030, because it's the end of the 2030 agenda. It has a lifespan of, if you want, of 15 years, from 2015 to 2030. People like to say that it's the agenda of the people, by the people, and for the people. And at the time of the adoption, in 2015, Ban Ki-moon, which was still the UN Secretary General, said that this is the people agenda, a plan of action for ending poverty in all its dimensions, irreversibly, everywhere, and leaving no one behind. I'm changing slide. If it's working, so really, it's the people agenda, because if you remember, before the SDG, before the 2030 agenda, we had the Millennium Development Goals, and it was 8 goals that were agreed in 2000 by the United Nations. There was not so much any really consultation with civil society organization. This time around, with the 2030 agenda, there's been 3 years of strong and non-stop advocacy, of heated discussion, tension, because everybody wanted to see their issue or their cause included in the discussion. And this is very much why it's called the people agenda, because civil society organization, just like an organization of persons with disability, were very much included in the process. The 2030 agenda has a motto, which is to leave no one behind. So the idea is really to get the people who are most at risk of marginalization, just like people with disabilities. And what is important to remember for people working in that field or working in the disability movement is that people with disabilities are very well represented in that document, in the 2030 agenda. So I'm changing slide. And in fact, we have 11 times a reference to people with disability in the 2030 agenda. So 3 times in the declaration, once in a paragraph on human rights, another one in vulnerable groups, and another time in education. 7 times in a target of the SDGs, so in education, in employment, in reducing inequalities, in inclusive cities, and in means of implementation and data. And a last time in follow-up and review on the paragraph on data disaggregation. So this is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And if you think about it, well, if you read the document, I should say, you will see that the SDGs is actually a chapter of the 2030 Agenda. So first you've got, in the 2030 Agenda, you've got the preamble, then you have the declaration, then you have the chapter on the SDGs, then you have the means of implementation, and then the last chapter is called follow-up and review. So the SDGs, I put a picture of the SDGs in front of you. And it's a set of 17 goals, and I'm gonna read them out loud. The first one is about poverty. The second goal is on zero anger. The third one is good health and well-being. The fourth goal is quality education. The fifth goal is gender equality. The sixth goal is clean water and sanitation. The seventh goal is affordable and clean energy. The eighth goal is decent work and economic growth. The ninth goal is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. The 10th goal is reduced inequalities. The 11th goal is sustainable cities and communities. Goal number 12 relates to responsible consumption and production. Number 30 relates to climate action. Number 14, life below water. Number 15, life on land. Number 16, peace, justice, and strong institution. And the last goal is the partnerships for the goals. I'm going to change slide. The Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, also known as the global goals. So you might hear sometimes SDGs, or you might gonna hear global goals. It's actually the same. And this is what I was saying earlier. The SDGs are actually the chapter 3 of the 2030 agenda. So the idea is that all the SDGs are integrated and indivisible. So you cannot, for instance, really focus on just one goal because it very much interrelates with another goal. Let's say, for instance, quality education. Well, in order to receive an education, for instance, you need to be able to access education, and you need to be in a good health, and you need to be not hungry, etc. So the idea is that all the goals are indivisible. And when we say it's global in nature, it's because it's not just for people living in developing countries, or it's goals for everybody, it's for everyone. So it's goals for any continent of the planet, any continents, any countries. It's not just for developing countries. The idea is that each government must decide on how the SDG should be incorporated into the national planning processes, policies, and strategies. I'm going to change the slide. Now, the SDGs are not legally binding. It's not like a UN convention or like the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities. It's voluntary. However, if you remember, all the countries in 2015 agreed to adopt and take part of that vision. So now they have, in some way, even if it's not legally binding, they have to implement and monitor the SDGs in their own countries. So countries are expected to take ownership and establish a national framework for achieving the 17 goals. They also have responsibility to follow up and review with quality, accessible, and timely data collection. And that's very important for people working in the field of disabilities, where there's not much data on people with disabilities. So as the coordinator of the SDGs within the European Disability Forum, I often get the question on if like we should prioritize one goal to another and over another. And I always say, like I said earlier, no, because the SDGs are a set of indivisible goals. They're very much interconnected. Now, however, we recognize that, you know, we might want to focus on different aspects of the goal. So for the members of the European Disability Forum, I always recommend to support the goals and targets focusing on the most vulnerable, and the goals where an urgent action is required. For instance, the situation of refugees with disability in Greece is an urgent action. Something needs to be done quickly. I'm going to change slide. But well, the idea is that now we're not going to. We're not having more work to do. It's just we need to use what's been done, what's already in place, or what's been already created by, for instance, the convention. So we need to be using existing policies and human rights frameworks to help us using those goals. And of course, what is important to do is to work with partners to address the goal and the targets, because not everybody has the capacity to focus on each goal. So the way the goals are organized, they have targets and indicators. So in each goals, you have a number of targets and a number of indicators. So in total, you've got 169 targets with approximately 230 indicators. That was set up by a consensus of experts. So I think my presentation there will be shared. So as much as I could, I provided the links of all the documents I talk about. So you will have access to the full list of indicators and target. So the experts that came up with that list of targets and indicators is called the Interagency and Expert Group on SDGs Indicators. And that group is composed of member states, as well as regional and international agencies, as well as, for instance, national statistical offices, etc. So the CSO, civil society organization, can influence the IAG. You can be involved there to make sure they can take on board our recommendation. One more thing related to the organization of the SDGs. In the indicators, it becomes a bit more complicated, meaning they are divided into 3 tiers. So tier 1 means that the data is available, countries are already collected that data, and is regularly produced by countries. So that's the type of indicators that you can easily collect the data for. Then tier 2 is an indicator that conceptually is clear. There is an established methodology and standards, but data is not always regularly provided by countries. And the tier 3 is where there's actually no established methodology and we don't really know how to do it. We have the indicator, but we don't know how to collect the data. And that's very important for us because so if you remember, I was telling you that the SDG is a chapter of the 2030 agenda. In that chapter, the SDG have been taken and expanded. And in it now, there's 19 references to people with disability. So one in the introduction, which actually, let me take my paper, at the top of the list of the SDGs indicators, it says that the indicators should be disaggregated where relevant by income, sex, age, race, ethnicity, migratory status, disability, and geographic location or other characteristic in accordance with the fundamental principles of official statistics. So that's very important for us because whenever it's possible, whenever it's relevant, data should be disaggregated by disability. Then we also have 7 times disability in the target and 11 times in the indicators. Now, as you can see, there's only 1 indicator in tier 1, 4 indicators in tier 2, and 5 indicators in tier 3. And 1 indicator that is all 3 tiers. It means that the indicators that the 5 indicators that relate to disability in tier 3, it could be a bit difficult to obtain, to get the data on disability. Even if it's wanted, it would be difficult to get. So the IAG, the group of experts, is working on that to see how it will be achievable for the different countries in the world. So I can come back on that, or if you have any question now, I can maybe take a break and answer some question before I go further.
Yes, thanks a lot, Marion. If you want now,
you can make some question. We take 10 minutes for question and answer, and you can text your question in the chat box, or and I will read them one by one, or you can raise your hand and I will give you directly the floor to make your question to Marion. So, well, if there are no question for the moment, I suggest you to go ahead with the presentation, and then we will open later the plenary for question and answer. Thanks a lot, Marion.
Okay, so now I'm going to explain what's the link with the United Nations Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities. So, like I said earlier, the SDGs are not legally binding, contrary to the CRPD, which is legally binding. However, when I work with the colleagues at EDF or the members of EDF, I always recommend to use the SDGs and the CRPD together. With the way we see that EDF is that really the SDGs is a roadmap or a platform to implement the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities. For instance, through the implementation of the SDGs, more data will be available for the implementation and the monitoring of the CRPD. Now, the reality is that it's really up to us, organization of persons with disability or the disability movement and all the allies, to provide this connection and the synergy between the CRPD and the SDGs to ensure persons with disability are included. So similarly to the CRPD, the SDGs have to be integrated in laws, in policies and budget. And as you know, the CRPD focuses on disability, but the SDG mainstream the human right of persons with disability. So when you get involved in the SDGs, and I'm sure some of you are, you realize that it's not just the disability movement is there, it's all the different stakeholders in all the different fields that relates from to the environment, to the economy, to everything you can think on this planet. So from a national perspective, there's considerable overlap between the provision of the CRPD and the SDGs. And there's really only 3 goals that do not have some specific links to article within the CRPD. Is the goal number 12 on responsible consumption and production, the goal 14 on life below water, and the goal 15 on life on land. Here we have on this slide, this new slide, is a picture or more like a drawing or schema of the link between the SDG and the CRPD. Because actually, for instance, if we take the goal number 1, which relate to no poverty, that goal relate to all the article of the CRPD. And if I take, for instance, number 4 on quality education, that relates directly to Article 24 of the CRPD, etc. So the articles of the CRPD are directly related to the SDG, to the targets and the indicator of the SDG. That's why the SDG and the CRPD should be using together. So for those of you working on the CRPD, you know that in June there's the Conference on State Parties to monitor the implementation of the CRPD in the different countries. Well, there's something, let's say, slightly similar, which is called the High-Level Political Forum, but this is to monitor the SDGs. So it's every July in New York at the United Nations, and it's very much a global structure to set up to assess progress, achievement, and challenges faced by all countries as they implement the 2030 agenda. So each country are encouraged to report on their progress at least twice in 15 years, and it's a voluntary process. So for instance, in this summer, in July, we're going to have 47 countries that decided to showcase their progress. So when it comes to bridging the gap, I wrote the different countries that relate to the project. For instance, Ecuador, Paraguay, Spain, and Sudan is going to showcase their progress this summer in July in New York. Burkina Faso will present in 2019, while Ethiopia and Italy already presented in 2017. Now, we don't know for Austria, there's no plan. And when it comes to the European Union, there's some talk, some discussion about the fact they're possibly going to present their work in 2019. So it seems like they're most likely going to do it. And when they present their work, it's called a voluntary national review. So it's actually a report that is presented to the High-Level Political Forum. So the idea is they need to showcase how they have incorporated SDG into their national development plans and budget. And the VNR is very important because the process to lead to the report should be inclusive, with the possibility for civil society organization to share on the progress of the SDGs. I'm almost finished there. I'll just like to explain what is the impact on the SDGs on our work. I think it's quite clear that the SDG is now a powerful tool and a clear roadmap to eradicate poverty, reduce inequality, and save the planet. The reality, what we realize is that government, private sectors, donors have started to align to the SDGs. So for instance, when funding is allocated, government have a tendency to follow the SDGs because, like I said, it's a clear roadmap. So it's very important to start working on SDGs in the disability movement to make sure that it's also implemented at the national level, at the local level, etc. I have 2-3 slides on suggestion on how to engage in SDGs. So this is what I've been suggested to EDF members is, for instance, to find out what your government has done so far and then what it's planning to do. It's also important to find out what civil society organizations are doing. And because, for instance, in Europe, we've got a civil society organization called SDG Watch Europe, which is a platform where all the European organizations are part of it. So we can update each other what's happening on the SDG at the European level. It's also important to find out what's happening at the national level if there's a civil society coordination, and if you can take part of that civil society mechanism. For those working on the CRPD, you can find out who the government, the focal point is for the CRPD and advocate for the SDGs awareness. Engage in Goal 17, so meaning the goal on partnership, by cooperating with other organizations of persons with disabilities, with the disability movement, civil society organization, academic and government. It's important to raise awareness, to build capacity and share information, and train experts on the SDG within your organization. A number of tools are already available, and in my next slide, I'm going to provide some link, but EDF, for instance, I just published a report on the SDGs. The International Disability Alliance, EDF is a member of the International Disability Alliance, has a number of tools available, and it's also possible to take part of the stakeholder group of persons with disabilities, which is the mechanism at the UN that follow the process on the SDGs. You can also engage with the National Statistic Office and find out what type of data is being collected, and advocate for SDG indicator to be translated at the national and with data disaggregated by disability. And of course, we recommend using the Washington Group set of questions. So this is my last slide. So for instance, I put some 4 ideas of materials that is possible to use. The EDF report I just mentioned, which is the link between the SDGs and the CRPD from a European perspective, and there's a number of recommendations on how to implement and monitor the SDG at the European level and also in international cooperation. EDF also published in March a resolution on the SDGs, and I invite you to read it. IDA just published a toolkit to engage in the voluntary national review process. So important to have a look at it, read it, is very helpful. And the stakeholder group of persons with disabilities just finalized a paper that has been submitted to the high-level political forum, and I invite you to read it. So this is the end of my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any question you will have.
Thanks a lot, Marion. Yes, we have several questions. I will read the question one by one, and I'll ask you to answer to each question one by one. And feel free to take your time to give answer, also go in details, because we have plenty of time. So we have a first question from Thomas. He said, do you know when Uganda will present to HLPF? Uganda.
I don't know it by heart, but I can have a look. I'm trying to think what is best. I can have a look now online, or you can also look on the VNR page, and then you will see if Uganda already presented or will present it, the country will be there also with the key person representing your government to contact. So yeah, can I look, Alicia, can I look for Uganda, or should I not? Can we take 2 minutes? Yeah,
of course.
Okay, so in that case, let me have a look. That'd be just easier. So VNR. Do you still have access to my screen? Okay, so right now I'm on a web page where focusing on the voluntary national review. And then here you will have all the different countries that either submitted a VNR or will submit a VNR. So if I look a bit down, I don't see any plans yet for Uganda. That means they don't have any intention yet. They might gonna, volunteer for next year in 2019. Is not clear yet, and if not, it might be later. for the moment in 2019, we have 18 countries that already said they will write a voluntary national review.
Okay. Then we have a comment, I think, by Anders Jacobsen. How the report on the SDG have not been clear. This help. How the report on the SDGs have been not clear.
I'm not sure what do you mean. Could you rephrase the question?
So just go ahead with the question. I have a question then from François Carbonet. Can we say that the CRPD Article 32 is not only linked to the goal 17, but cross-cutting to all goals, except to the 3 unrelated?
Yeah, hi, François. Yes, I totally agree. I think there's a bit of that picture of schema I showcase, I think could be improved, and then Article 32, which is on international cooperation, could really relate to all the goals, not necessarily just the goal 17 on partnership. I fully agree. Thank you.
So then we have another question from Andrea Fickmüller. That is, I miss your point on the second suggestion, which said something like you would not necessarily engage on environmental issues.
I think what I meant to say is that when you work on if you work in the CRPD, you have a tendency maybe to focus on issues that might seem more relevant to people with disabilities. When you work within the SDGs, you might gonna actually engage with actors that you don't necessarily engage with. For instance, people working on climate action, people working on life on land, etc. So and then that's for a number of, I see it with the members of EDF, is this new dialogue is a bit different. We're not necessarily used to that because we're not necessarily used to mainstream the issue of people with disabilities in different aspects. So that's what I mean. And then another point I will make is that what we've noticed so far in Europe is that some governments have decided to sometimes focus on one aspect of the SDGs. For instance, in France, if you try to find the platform within the government that's taking care of the SDGs, you will find that is under the environmental website of the government. So a number of colleagues in the field wonder how really that relates to the issue of persons with disabilities. And then I think it's our role to raise awareness to our government to mention that no, the SDG is not just about the environment, but it really has 3 pillars. The pillars are really are the social pillar, the economical pillar, and the environmental pillar.
Thanks. Then we have another question from Virendra Rai. Who and when to review if the member states are achieving the disability-related targets on SDGs? Who and when to review if the member states are achieving the disability-related targets on SDGs?
Well, that's a very complicated question to answer because it really depends from one country to another. So what we've noticed so far is some countries have decided to create their own national set of target and indicators. And then, for instance, when I was supporting colleague in Estonia, they came to see me because my colleague came to see me because well, there was nothing on disability in the targets and indicators anymore. So again, if you want, the disability aspect of the targets and indicators were a bit lost in the translation, or lost along the way. So it was up to us to remind the government of the importance of making sure that disability was in the national set of indicators. So yes, so it really just depends from one country to another. And for instance, the EU, the European Union, sorry, has decided to come up with its own set of indicators and target. Well, I should not say target, because they kept the 17 SDGs and they came up with 100 indicators. There's no more targets. And at first, when we saw the first version, there was nothing on disability. And then we are advocating to make sure people with disability were also included. And then they are. But we're still going to have to push to make sure that that's just not on the paper, but we actually have data that is collected on people with disability at the European Union level.
Then we have a couple of questions from Raya. Ask for, can we work on different periods, and then can we work on our monitoring data collection?
Can you work on the monitoring data collection?
She asks, can we work on our monitoring data collection?
I'm not sure what you mean. Is it to like, is it with the government or as a civil society organization, or because because in I guess what's missing a bit in the SDGs is that there's not really room for data collected by civil society organization, or there's no qualitative data, you know. So, but I think it's important to still, as a civil society organization, to continue to share the story we collect, we heard, or the data we collect, to also bring that to governments and showcase what's happening when you, for instance, when you live with a disability.
Thanks, Marion. Then we have another question from a person that didn't put his or her name, and said, considering that SDG is not binding as compared to the CRPD, what can DPOs do if their government is not in line with the SDGs?
Well, I mean, this is a good question. I'm not sure. There's just so many avenues you could take. I think it's important to continue the advocacy role that we can have on raising awareness, making the link between the SDG and the CRPD, because the SDGs are actually based on human rights conventions. So, but they're very often forgotten when it comes to the implementation of the SDGs. So I think it's just up to us to continue our role and, you know, and advocate for the SDGs to be monitored and implemented with the inclusion of people with disabilities.
Then we have a comment again from Anders Jacobsen, saying it has not been clear how we report on SDGs. Your presentation has helped clarify this. Then we have a question from Nat.
Can I just add something?
Of course.
I'm just going to add the fact that, because I had that question, when it comes to CRPD, you know, there's an alternative report. This is not the case when for the voluntary national review. I mean, in some countries, civil society organizations have decided to provide an alternative report with the views of all the stakeholders in the civil society organization. But there's not necessarily an alternative report. It depends on one country to another.
question from Natalie. Is the private sector reporting the HLPF, and are the countries and actors somehow obliged to mention disability-related achievements?
The private sector doesn't report, but it can be obviously included by the government in the report. Now, there's no, the government do not need to mention disabilities. There's no requirement as such. So that's why I always feel like disability movement have to make that link and advocate to raise awareness even among the governments.
Question from Sharmila. The role of civil society organization to implement it in their national context.
The role of civil society organization to implement in their national context.
Well, I think if you know the civil society organization is so broad and is so vast. It very much depends the work of the different civil society organization. You know, I think it depends. I guess the main role civil society organization has to play is to raise awareness and you know, train experts on SDGs, you know, provide material, etc. But then of course they also have a role to play when they're working, I don't know, with their members, etc. I'll see with EDF, we have different organizations. We have about one representative per country in Europe, and they have that organization per country will have a number of organizations at the national level, so they have to relay the information, etc., to reach the local level. So it is really providing awareness and sharing this information.
Another question from Eugen. In 2016, Uganda presented its report on CRPD, and both the government and CSO produced reports. Can the HLPF use reports from the CRPD panel of experts to understand the status of countries like Uganda?
Yeah, I think that's the idea. The idea is not to duplicate the work that we're doing. So, for instance, when Uganda would be presenting its voluntary national review, it's already very much important to see what's been done with the CRPD committee, with the different report, and use that. Now, it doesn't mean the government's going to think about using the CRPD reports, but it's up to us to make sure that that report already been, you know, used again. But for instance, when the EU, the EU reported, and then the committee provided its report. I'm not sure how. Trying to remember how it was phrased, but the idea is that when the committee told the EU that it was time to take the SDGs on board also for people with disabilities. So the CRPD committee is very much aware of the SDGs, and they also usually make the recommendation that the SDGs needs to be taken on board by the different government, and that recommendation needs to be used when it's time to report for the voluntary national review.
A question from Savannah. Could you please talk a little bit more about the link between SDGs and SENDI framework?
Yeah, I won't, because I'm not an expert in the SENDI framework, but I could, if you leave you you know, your details, I will be happy to send you a bit more documentation about that.
Another question from Ryan. The goal which is related to the climate, I think climate change, how does it been connected to the CRPD?
Yeah, to my knowledge, is when it comes to climate, I don't think there's any article on the CRPD that relate to climate action. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's the case.
Then we have a comment and a question from Joy. We say, thank you, Steph and Alicia, for the presentation. Thank you for the participation, Joy. I noticed that Nigeria was listed as scheduled to make a presentation on the HLPF meeting in 2017. Did they actually make a presentation?
Which country?
Nigeria.
The Nigeria page. I'll just gonna click on the PDF, and then I believe that will be the full national voluntary review that was provided to the high-level political forum last year. So you can see at the top is an 100 pages, and if we do a quick search, I can look if we can see if I do a quick search, it seems, the word disability is in a document. It doesn't mean much, but sometimes in some documents, people with disability are fully forgotten. So I think there seems like a number of organizations took part in the national, in the VNR. And person with disability seems to be, included. Which is you don't always see that in some VNR. So, yeah.
Then we have another question from another anonymous attendee, and said, I think that the SDGs is a very good platform for the implementation of the CRPD, but also I think that the various approaches by governments are a key factor that we as CSOs and DPOs need to look at. If you want to make a comment, reply to this comment.
Yeah, I think like I said earlier, the platform is a very good. The SDG are a very good platform to really use it. To really fight for the rights of persons with disability and to make sure the CRPD is implemented and monitored in the different countries. But there's from one country to another, there's really different ways to make sure the government are implemented the SDGs. So there's no really one answer to how it's done from one country to another.
Then we have another question from Ryan asking, how does the goal 13, climate action, is connected to the CRPD?
Yeah, I won't answer that because I'm not really an expert on climate action and when it comes to environment. But I mean, I invite you to look at the CRPD and then just do the exercise yourself and see how it could relate to climate action. If you look at the targets and the indicators of climate action, how it relates to the CRPD. And you will receive my presentation, so you will have access to the full list of targets and indicators.
So apparently we don't have any other question. I encourage the audience to make other question, to take the opportunities that today we are with the real experts about SDGs. So feel free to make more questions that we have still time. You can also, if you want, raise your hand and directly talk with Marion. I will allow you to talk and I will activate your microphone. So don't be shy, ask to Marion. So, well, good. Maybe your presentation was so clear and it's really good. And I don't know, Marion, if you want just to make a conclusion or giving some tips or good practices, how to replicate, for example, to link the SDGs and CRPD, or if you want to give some suggestion, especially because our audience is full, for example, of DPOs and civil society organizations, and I don't know if you want to make a conclusion, also giving some suggestion to our audience today.
Yeah, no, thank you, Alicia. I think I'm going to leave it there. I have in the presentation, I left my email address. And then you will also find my Twitter account. So I'm happy if you have any question, you can contact me, please, by all means. I will also be attending the high-level political forum in July in New York, so I will be there. So I'm hoping I could meet some of you if you're planning to attend. But I remain available if you have any question after that by email or by Twitter. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Marion. It was a really interesting session, and unfortunately, we arrived at the end of the second session about the SDGs and their reference to the inclusion of persons with disability. I would like to thank you again for your participation and for having dedicated your time to us today. I also would like to say thanks to our audience, and I sincerely hope that today's session has taught you something and clarified some doubts about this important topic. Just a couple of last things before leaving you. The webinar training cycle issues a certificate of attendance only to those whom will attend at least 75% of the webinars and respond to the satisfaction survey. The 75% of the training course correspond to 9 out of 12 webinars. You will receive the survey together with the webinar recordings and the learning materials in the follow-up email at the end of the session. A lot of persons asked me also during the session about the PowerPoint presentation. Don't worry, you will receive together with a follow-up email after this session, also the PowerPoint presentation. The next session will take place the third week of May, and it's titled Disability Inclusive Development, International Donor Strategies and Approaches on the Inclusion of Persons with Disability in Development Cooperation. This session will explore the links between disability and development and the role of international cooperation in promoting approaches to the inclusion of persons with disability. So again, I thank you all. I thank you, our speaker today, Marion. I thank you to the audience, and I hope to see you also for the next session. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.